You want the facts? We got it here. It's hot, it's black. Come sit and sip black tea. Defund, abolish, or restore. What is a person of color to do in today's America? These terms are not new, but recently in the past years have come up in various circles. From communities to Congress, police reform is a triggering topic all across this country. In this Black Tea exclusive, you will hear the community's response. But first, we can't ignore where this stems from: police brutality and the Black Lives Matter movement. Here are a few members of our local community who had an opinion on that.
Well, I mean, it's quite terrible, you know. To first of all, there's no such thing as a blue life, right? This doesn't exist. What's a blue life? Someone's uniform is their life? No, someone's uniform is not their life. They can take it off, they can put it on, they can wear. Many of the police officers don't even wear uniforms. And are the uniforms even blue? I don't even know. So the Blue Lives Matter is just silliness, right? It's just kind of saying. It's just a pushback against Black Lives Matter. And the All Lives Matter, the same thing. They're responsive, they're reactionary. And they continue to what I was saying before, like they say that the experiences and the lives of Black people do not matter. And refusing to understand what Black Lives Matter means. Refusing to understand, as I said, when there's people that are affected so much in society by all the wrongs historically that you've done, and you continue to ignore that, and then you ask them to sit at the table with you and to say that you actually respect them, you know that that's a lie, they know that's a lie.
What does it mean to you when you hear the terms Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, and Blue Lives Matter?
Well, I think all of those things are true in some sense. The reason Black Lives Matter is important, and it's important to say that, is that Black lives have been historically ignored in this country. They really haven't mattered. Of course, everyone's life matters, but people often say that or use that language, as a way of trying to push away the issues that Black Lives Matter advocates are trying to bring to our attention. And those issues are very, very real. And of course, Blue Lives Matter. I do not want policemen to be unsafe either. But I think that if you want policemen to be more safe, then you should believe that Black Lives Matter, because policemen will be more safe if we're able to build communities where police can interact with the community in a more positive way.
So do you believe right now the police are more unsafe, or Black people are more unsafe?
As a group, I think Black people are more unsafe.
Okay. And I'm just asking because when I hear Blue Lives Matter, I see it as that's an occupation, right? It's not a life. It's a shirt.
There are two different intents with Blue Lives Matter and with All Lives Matter. So when somebody says Black Lives Matter, we're obviously talking about the fact that in this country, Black people are discriminated against, they're killed, they are murdered, they are incarcerated at rates way higher than white people, right? When somebody responds to Black Lives Matter with Blue Lives Matter, first it's like, first of all, being a police officer is a choice. Like, you don't have a choice whether or not you're Black, right? You don't have a choice whether or not you're white. That's how you were born. So when somebody says Blue Lives Matter, it's like, why are you defending an occupation? Like, why are you defending something that is not an aspect of someone's like identity that they cannot change, you know? And on top of that, like, blue lives are part of a structure that was specifically designed to uphold white supremacy and capitalism since its inception in the United States. Like, cops were specifically designed to protect the property of rich white people. And now people say, oh, well, they've changed since then. They're more about protecting and serving. That's not true. Blue lives are a response. They don't prevent crime, right? They prosecute crime, right? But they don't prevent crime. And so it makes you really wonder, like, what is the purpose of investing in a police force that continuously brutalizes communities instead of investing into the communities themselves to alleviate the issues that have to do with that are potentially causing these crimes, right? So when somebody says Blue Lives Matter, they fundamentally don't understand what we mean when we say Black Lives Matter. When somebody says All Lives Matter, they're just racist. Like, point blank, they're just racist, right? Because what they're doing is they're saying that, like, oh yeah, well, every life should matter. We shouldn't, be preferential to one particular race than another. It just means that they don't understand the fact that Black people, since they arrived in this continent, have been disenfranchised and have been killed and have been murdered. And those systems that were created to ensure that that continued are still in existence today. So it's an amnesia. White people have amnesia with what happened in this country. White people have amnesia with the fundamental history of how this country came about. And that's kind of one of the tools of white supremacy, is to make people forget those things. That's why curricula are whitewashed. That's why narratives of, like, Martin Luther King, for example, are whitewashed. It's to be more palatable to people. So in short, when people say All Lives Matter to Black Lives Matter, it's because they fundamentally don't understand the history of this country and of colonization of the Americas in general.
Black Lives Matter has intentionally been misrepresented by the folks who want to misunderstand it. At the base, we all know that Black Lives Matter means Black Lives Matter too. And the people who want to misrepresent what that means want to take it as some sort of terrorist group, which is preposterous, because when we are just fighting for equality and we are just fighting for basic human rights, that is vastly different than a person choosing to become a police officer, and that is not a blue life. As far as people saying all lives matter, it's so disrespectful, and it's such an intentional level of disregard and disrespect that I can't even stomach it, really.
I had a distant cousin who was murdered. And I say murdered. I think the police did get off, but he was in a park. He had an open bottle of beer, and he was sitting on a bench in a local neighborhood park. We live in Pittsburgh, so the area was Wilkinsburg. And someone reported that he was in the park. First of all, it was in the summertime, and he was dressed with layers of coats. Obviously, if you looked at him, you would say something is wrong. It's summertime. He has on a green army fatigue over another coat, and so he had layers of clothes on. If you looked at him from the streets, you might say he may have been homeless, but you could tell something was wrong. And when the police arrived, he got up from the bench, and he had his open bottle of beer, and he walked away from them. And they were hollering to him to stop, that it was the police, and he was mumbling something, and he had a habit of talking to himself, and he was mumbling something, and he kept walking away from them. He got to a fence, and they told him that if he don't stop, they were going to let the dog loose. So they let the dog loose on him, and he stabbed the dog and killed the dog. And they unloaded on him and killed him because they said the dog was considered an officer.
Are you? Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they killed him. So I call it murder. To see that they could not have handled that in a different way. What behooves me is when you see us, and I mean Black people, we walk away and get killed. We get shot in our back. And the police are able to say they were fearful for their life. But when they see them, meaning white people, come to their face, attack them, they're not afraid. They're not afraid. I don't understand how all of those people who was edged on by Trump got to go home.
The statistics tell us that a black body is more likely to be murdered by an officer than a white body. So, you know, we're not discussing policy. We're discussing human decency. So I'm a little triggered by the Blue Lives Matter because, and again, you know, truth of it is, I'm white. I have an incredible amount of privilege. If an officer stops me, I don't ever have to. I don't have to think about my life being in danger. And I don't know that I can say the same thing for you, Tiara. Right. I mean, it is our tendency to put, you know, a label on something and then pass this basket around without ever opening the lid and looking at it, right? So I think, you know, since you asked me, I think defund the police as a phrase may not be the most accurate way to talk about policy shift that we want to, that I want to see. Maybe you want to see. I don't know. So if you're asking me, I feel that we need to really invest in mental health, you know, treatment, addressing it. I don't know why we don't talk about mental health as in our education system. You know, we have these enormous militarized police departments. And the assumption is that we're walking around at any moment, our lives could be in danger. Well, you know, Tiara, you feel that way as a black person. Who do you call when you feel that way? The police department in its history was set up to, you know, capture runaway slaves, and we see this continued. There's just no way to sort of slice out the rhetoric around, you know, the militarization of it, and it's charged, right? Because people feel like I'm going to be unsafe. But I don't know, like, how we really get through any day if we feel like we live in this world in which at any moment, oh wait, live in a world in which at any moment my body might be in danger. You mean if I were a black body? Like, people really need to see what is happening. I'm a white woman. I don't really fear for my life because I don't have an entire arm of a government that statistics tell me is going to do me harm, possibly, right? I get that it feels like we're saying all police officers are bad people. I don't know how you want to hear it, right? If people hear it that way, sorry, right? We need to look at this, and we need to have these conversations in that, you know, people have this immediate reaction that they're suddenly going to be so unsafe if we defund the police, right? Well, there's just, I don't need to tell you, there's just a lot of parts of that people don't understand, the messaging.
So if you could coin your own term, instead of saying defund the police, what would you?
I mean, like, well, I'm not, I'd like to be.
Say that you think would be more, I guess, palatable or pleasing to people's ears.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. What, do we need to? Do we need to please their ears? I mean, I just think there needs to be more, maybe less fund the police. I mean, that's not very catchy. I don't know. That's the thing is, it's very easy for white people, especially, to get caught up in the rhetoric of it, right?
So are you are against both terms, or because you say you understand why people say it, but are you against those terms, abolish the police or defund the police?
I think abolish the police is basically a frustration, and I think if you did that, you're going to create a whole separate set of issues and concerns. The defund the police, I think, that depends on what you mean by it, because it means different things to different people. If you're looking at expanding other programs and you're taking money from police to do that, I think some cities have begun to do that. I think we're taking a long, hard look at establishing some citizen response teams here. So of the two, I'm much more open to hearing about taking like how we reallocate funds or things of that nature to address societal problems that may or may not be should be handled by the police. I mean, there are a lot of things that, because the police are open 24/7, the police have been tasked with doing it. You know what I mean? And so what our response has been, we go out and we get the best training we can to be able to, to handle those type of things. I think of the two, that's one that probably needs a lot more study and a lot more looking at.
My name is Terry Watson. I do a lot of different things in this community, particularly. Most people know me for my disability advocacy, but approximately maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I started to focus on policing, and so my advocacy now has been to, I like to say, abolish police culture. Most people talk about abolishing police. I talk about abolishing police culture as it currently exists, to be more inclusive, not just in the community, but also inside of law enforcement too. Well, when I first started looking at police culture, it started because of my ancestry. I found out in the most weirdest way that my great-grandfather was the first black patrolman to have a full career in the city of New York. He was born into slavery, actually made a very long journey after the emancipation, and wound up becoming a patrolman in Brooklyn, New York in 1892. So if you can imagine police culture in 1892. And after I found that out, I kept digging more and more, and I found out that he also convinced his brother-in-law, Samuel Battle, to also become a policeman, and he became the first black policeman, sergeant and lieutenant, bureau commissioner for the NYPD. I think you might be familiar with one of my friends and colleagues. I call her friends and partners in crime, Carrier Horn, right? She crossed that thin blue line by stopping the choking of a handcuffed African-American man, which you would think would be celebrated. Even though it was back in 2006, you think that would be celebrated. Instead, she was assaulted by her partner and then fired. And when you see that happen to a fellow police officer, you say, wait, that's not me. I'm not going to lose my job, right? Or I'm not going to suffer any kind of retaliation. But also, what that got me thinking about, it reminds me of Samuel Battle. He talked about this too. When he was a police officer, he got the silence treatment because they did not want black police officers in the NYPD. And he talked about, there's being maybe these 1 or 2 or 3 white officers that would talk to him, but not in front of other white officers because they themselves didn't want to be retaliated against. So I think that's what wound up happening is that those particular good police officers, or I should say potentially good police officers, they won't speak out or they won't intervene because they're afraid of that retaliation and that kickback. And that's happened with Carrier Horn, that happened with Nakia Jones, and many more that I can't say out loud because in confidentiality, they told me their stories in confidentiality. But, what's interesting though is when people like Carrier speak out and people see that courageousness. Some are willing to talk behind the scenes. I'm trying to encourage those folks to speak up in public. Right? We want to make sure that if you are a police officer and you see abuse, or you see another police officer putting someone in danger, we want you to be empowered to intervene, but also have a duty to do so. So the law really is not just a policy, which most people think about policies of duty to intervene. It's not a policy, it's a law. And what it does is that if you see something happen and you don't intervene, like in George Floyd's case, all of the officers that are there are held accountable, not just the one that actually did the act. The second part of that law is if someone does intervene, that person is protected, right? They're not going to be retaliated, they're not going to be fired, assaulted, sexually assaulted. There's so many ways of retaliation. And then it moves on to what happens if there is retaliation. So the law is specifically talks about firing and being charged, talks about the registry. So unlike Tamir Rice, where the officer was deemed not to be a good officer at one location and placed in this new location, that's something that this law also dives into. Then it goes into restorative justice, about if there is retaliation, how do we provide restorative justice to that police officer. And then the piece that I added to that law was that if a department willingly retaliates, then during their collective bargaining agreement, someone from Carrier's Law has to be represented there to actually address that one issue of retaliation. Now that dives into interacting with the police unions. And right now, I'll just say, the police union right now is not that happy with that particular part of the law.
Yes, I'm in favor of abolishing the police altogether, but I recognize that there needs to be steps between here and there, right? And that will involve engaging the community more. There are a couple different ways we do this. The Citizens Advisory Board, or the advisory board that they're talking about, is a good way. Is a good, or the COB, the Civilian Oversight Board, sorry, is a decent way to start. We need to make sure our police officers are being hired from within our communities, and that there's a diversity of police officers. The fact that there just simply isn't a diversity of police officers in this town is problematic. We need police officers that are regularly engaged in the community. If we had a police officer coming from these organizations around the community, or having regular contact, there needs to be a liaison. But right now, because the problem with police is that they view the citizenry as enemies. They do not view themselves as part of the community. They view themselves as occupiers, or shepherds that have the right to shoot us, the sheep. And so we need to change that mentality. And it actually starts in training. It starts in police academy. And honestly, the culture, people always say that there are good cops. And I've met police officers that I think are good people as individuals. But any cop that doesn't report a bad cop is a bad cop. And the reason why they don't report bad cops is because they then get canned or their lives are in danger. That means the entire thing is corrupt, and so it needs to be uprooted from the roots as a result. And until then, we need to do steps to mitigate that, which will involve changing the leadership too of the police. Until this, and I want to highlight that point too, right? Because I want to say back to the Osagie and those three officers, knowing that Pianazak was involved in a case prior that was a civil suit because of roughing up someone during a riot, and then it was covered up by the State College Police. There are other things I can't say because I don't have proof that I have heard and believe about these guys. But we're looking at what looks to be a cover-up by this. That's the problem. Get rid of the people involved in the cover-up.
Thank you so much for joining us, Nick. Tune in for our next segment, What's the Tea?
And now, an exclusive clip from What's the Tea. And so that's what's unfortunate, because so many police officers are breaking their code of ethics. We're only basing good officers based off you doing your job correctly. It doesn't mean that you're a good officer. If not being racist makes you a good cop,
we have a problem. If doing your job correctly without using excessive force just makes you a good, that's it, makes you a good cop, we have a problem, because that should be happening anyway. But there are so many officers who are going overboard that, what? I mean, I had my white neighbors call the police on me at 11:30 at night because my TV was loud. My television.